Have you ever wondered what it means to stake your heart on a single choice? In the rugged town of Silverton Ridge, a young doctor named Clara Whitfield arrived seeking only independence, only to find herself caught in the crossfire of outlaws and destiny. One moment, she was mending wounds under gunfire. The next, she was facing a sheriff whose steady eyes promised both danger and devotion. But love on the frontier is never simple. Clara had to choose cling to her hard-won freedom or risk her heart on a man who carried enemies, burdens, and scars of his own. And Elias McGraw, the sheriff sworn to protect the town, had to ask himself, could he protect her and still open himself to love? If you were in her place, would you dare to love a man hunted by outlaws? If you were him, could you offer your heart when every day might be your last? Stay with us as we walk into the dust and fire of 1875, where one woman's courage and one man's promise would test the very meaning of love that lasts a lifetime. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Frontier Hearts so you never miss a story where love outshines the wilderness. The crack of a gunshot rolled across the dry plains of Silverton Ridge, Colorado, in the summer of 1875. Clara Whitfield dropped low behind an overturned wagon, clutching her worn medical satchel to her chest. Her heart thudded against her ribs as splinters rained from the wagon boards, bullets chewing the wood far too close for comfort. This was not the arrival she'd envisioned for her first day as the town's new physician. "Stay down," a man's voice barked as he slid into cover beside her. His hat brim shadowed sharp blue eyes, his weathered denim was caked with dust, and the silver star pinned to his vest told her all she needed to know. This was the law in Silverton Ridge. "I wasn't planning on standing up to dance," Clara muttered, quickly checking her bag to be sure her medicines were intact. The sheriff's mouth quirked with a hint of a smile before he turned his attention back to the street. "You picked yourself a fine day to ride into town. The McCall gang decided to make trouble." He spoke as calmly as though remarking on the weather. "Name's Elias McGraw, Sheriff Elias McGraw." He broke open his revolver with practiced hands and slipped in fresh rounds. Clara straightened, brushing grit from her skirt. "Dr. Whitfield," she replied, bristling at his knowing tone. Clara, for the first time since accepting the mayor's offer, she questioned whether she had been wise to come. McGraw's gaze flicked toward her, steady beneath the shadow of his hat. Silverton Ridge needs a doctor who can keep her hands steady and her courage steady too. From the look of it, you've got both. Before Clara could answer, the sheriff rose just high enough to fire 3 crisp shots. A shout rang from across the street. "Got one," he said grimly. "Listen, when I say run, you head straight to that building yonder. That's my office." He nodded toward a narrow doorway half hidden in the dust. "And what about you?" Clara asked, surprising herself with the note of concern in her voice. "I'll be right behind you." He checked his weapon once more. "Ready?" She nodded, gathering her skirts in one hand and gripping her satchel with the other. Now, gunfire roared as the sheriff laid down cover. Clara darted across the street, lungs burning, boots skidding in the dirt. She burst through the sheriff's office door, bent double and gasping for breath. Moments later, Elias backed in, still firing at shadows, then slammed the door shut and slid the bolt. "Welcome to Silverton Ridge," he said with a wry grin, tugging off his hat. His dark hair, already streaked with premature silver, fell damp across his brow. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes were strikingly clear, the kind of blue that held firm in any storm. Not the welcome wagon I had imagined, Clara said, forcing her voice calm. Does this sort of thing happen often? Only on days that end in Y? He gave the curtain a cautious lift. The McCall boys are just making a statement. And what statement might that be that they don't take kindly to me locking up their youngest brother last month? When he turned back to her, his expression softened. You're younger than I expected. Clara straightened her shoulders, meeting his eyes without flinching. My age doesn't diminish my training. I graduated at the top of my class in Philadelphia. The sheriff lifted his hands in mock surrender. No offense meant. Doc, we're glad to have you here, whatever the age. Our last doctor loved whiskey more than medicine. Outside, the shooting faded into uneasy silence. Elias shifted the curtain again, then stepped back. Looks like they've had their fun for the day. Then there may be wounded who need attention, Clara said, already reaching for her bag. He touched her arm, firm but brief, and the warmth of it startled her. Give it a few more minutes. The McCalls have used wounded men as bait before. Clara reluctantly set her bag upon his desk. Then, perhaps, while we wait, you can tell me more about Silverton Ridge. My letters were mostly with Mayor Alden. A shadow crossed Elias's face at the name. The mayor is set on dragging this corner of Colorado into proper civilization. Hiring a lady doctor is part of that plan. And you don't agree? Clara asked quietly. He leaned against his desk, arms folded. I've nothing against progress, Doc, but I've seen towns lose their soul chasing after it. A commotion outside drew his gaze back to the window. He sighed, checking his revolver again. Duty calls. Stay put until I return, Sheriff. He paused at the door. Be careful. That half-smile touched his face again, transforming him. Always am. Doc, always am. Clara found herself at the window as he strode into the street, tall and unshaken, calming the frightened townsfolk with the quiet confidence that seemed at odds with the gunfire she had just survived. Watching him, she felt the strangest pull of certainty. Perhaps this rough frontier town was exactly where she was meant to be. Sheriff Elias McGraw had made it clear that the outlaw wounded during the gunfight would be treated before anyone else. Clara found herself kneeling over the man, her instruments laid out neatly on the sheriff's desk, while Elias stood guard at the door with revolver drawn. The outlaw moaned as she probed the wound, whiskey fumes clinging to his breath. You've got a steady hand, Doc, the man slurred, eyes glazed from both pain and liquor. Don't get used to it, Elias cut in, his voice sharp. Once she patches you up, you're headed for a cell. Clara worked quickly, cleaning the torn flesh, removing the bullet, and stitching the shoulder with precision. The outlaw passed out halfway through, his head lolling to one side, but by the time she tied off the final thread, his breathing was even. Elias hauled him to his feet and shoved him toward the holding cell. By the time the last of the injured were seen to, the sun had begun its slow descent. Clara stepped out onto the boardwalk in front of her modest new clinic. The mountains beyond Silverton Ridge glowed gold and rose in the fading light. What had seemed harsh and unforgiving earlier in the day now shimmered with possibility. She had barely a moment to herself before Elias joined her, his badge catching the dying sun. You must be hungry, he said. Clara's stomach answered before she could. Starved. I haven't eaten since dawn. A hint of amusement softened his stern features. Mrs. Thatcher over at the boarding house has been cooking all day. waiting to meet the new doctor. You'll find no warmer welcome in town. Lead the way." "Sheriff," Clara replied, falling into step beside him. As they strolled down the dusty street, Elias pointed out each establishment: the general store with its wide porch stacked with barrels, the livery with the scent of horses drifting on the breeze, the one-room schoolhouse that doubled as a church come Sunday morning. Townsfolk paused to greet them, eager to catch a glimpse of the young woman who had dared to come west to practice medicine. Clara returned each greeting with a smile, though she felt the weight of their curiosity. "Everyone seems kind," she remarked. "They are," Elias said, a chuckle hidden in his throat. "But don't let it fool you. By tomorrow, half the town will be whispering about why a woman like you would choose doctoring over finding herself a husband." Clara's jaw tightened. "Because I know what happens to women who can't fend for themselves. My mother was widowed young, left with 3 children and no way to provide beyond mending and keeping house. I won't put myself in that position." Elias gave her a long, searching look. "Forgive me. I didn't mean to offend. You've had a trying day." She sighed, her shoulders relaxing. "And I didn't mean to snap. You're right, it's been a lot to take in." The boarding house stood tall at the corner, its wide porch lined with rocking chairs, curtains fluttering in the open windows. Mrs. Thatcher, plump and cheerful, bustled out the moment they arrived, arms flung wide as though Clara were a long-lost niece. "My stars, you're thinner than a fence rail," she exclaimed, clucking like a mother hen. "We'll have to fatten you up. Come on now. I've kept the best room ready just for you." The room upstairs was plain but comfortable, boasting a washstand and a quilt neatly tucked across the bed. Best in the house. "Mrs. Thatcher declared proudly before sweeping Clara back downstairs for supper. The long table in the dining room was already filled with boarders. Roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread filled the air with mouth-watering aroma. Conversation flowed easily, everyone eager to offer both gossip and advice. "Mind Widow Bartlett," warned Jonas Harlan, an elderly miner with a beard like tangled rope. "She'll have you visiting her place 3 times a week for ailments no doctor alive could cure. And stay clear of the saloon on payday," added Miss Carver, the schoolteacher, adjusting her spectacles. "Those ranch hands grow rowdy once the whiskey starts pouring." Clara laughed politely, though she noticed Elias across the table, watching her with quiet thoughtfulness. His gaze lingered as though weighing something unspoken. After supper, he offered to walk her back to the clinic where her trunks had been delivered. The night was cool. The stars spread across the heavens like a quilt of diamonds. Clara stopped to take it in, awed. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Elias slowed his step, looking upward with her. "It has its moments." He hesitated, then added, "Don't let today shape your view of Silverton Ridge. It's a good place, full of good people." And its sheriff she teased, surprised by her boldness. That smile of his, half hidden, half warm, appeared again. "I do my best, not always easy." They reached her clinic, and Clara turned to him at the door. "Thank you for the escort." "Sheriff McGraw." "Elias," he corrected gently. "If we're to be tending outlaws together, you may as well call me by my name." "Elias," she repeated softly, tasting it. He touched the brim of his hat and stepped back. "Get some rest. Doc, tomorrow the whole town will suddenly discover they're ailing, just to meet you." She watched him turn to leave, then called after him. "Do you always carry this town on your shoulders alone?" He paused, glancing back, his face shadowed in moonlight. "Someone has to. Even the strongest shoulders need rest," she said quietly. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, maybe recognition before he gave a single nod and walked away. Clara lingered at the door until he disappeared into the dark. Inside, she lit a lamp and surveyed her new domain. The main room held little more than an exam table, a medicine cabinet, and a desk, while a small doorway led to her living quarters. It was simpler than her family home back east, but it was hers. As she unpacked her instruments, her mind strayed to Elias McGraw. There had been loneliness in his eyes, a kind she knew too well. She had come west to outrun memories of a broken engagement and the sting of betrayal. What ghosts, she wondered, haunted the sheriff of Silverton Ridge? The next morning dawned bright. Clara was awake with the sun, arranging her clinic until every jar and bandage sat neatly in place. Just as Elias had warned, a steady stream of patients appeared after breakfast. Some carried true ailments, others came mostly to gawk at the young woman with the title of doctor. By noon, she had soothed a child's aching ear, lanced a ranch hand's infected cut, and counseled 3 different women on matters of household health. She was bent over Mr. Langford, the blacksmith, whose knee had swollen from overwork at the forge. When the door banged open, Elias strode in, one arm wrapped around a lanky young man who staggered with blood seeping through his shirt. "What happened?" Clara cried, clearing the examination table. "Hunting accident," Elias said, easing the boy down. His jaw was tight. "Doc, this is Samuel Alden, the mayor's son. Bullet grazed his side." The boy groaned as Clara cut away the bloody fabric. "Wasn't hunting," he confessed through clenched teeth. "I was practicing my draw. Gun went off." Elias rolled his eyes heavenward. "I told you to wait until I had time to teach you properly." Clara bent close, examining the wound. The bullet had torn a nasty groove across the young man's ribs but missed anything vital. Relief steadied her hands as she cleaned the cut and stitched it neatly. Samuel flinched but bore it without complaint. "You're lucky," Clara told him firmly. A few inches deeper, and this conversation would be very different. She felt Elias's gaze on her as she worked, steady and intent, as though weighing more than just her skill. When she finished bandaging the wound, she turned to find him leaning against the wall, arms crossed, his eyes never leaving her. "You've got capable hands," he said. "It's essential in my line of work," she replied briskly, washing the blood from her fingers. Samuel shifted on the table, looking embarrassed. "Please, don't tell my father," he begged Elias. "He already thinks I'm not fit for the West." The sheriff's sigh was long and weary. "Fine, but you're finished with guns until I say otherwise." Samuel nodded gratefully before leaving, clutching his side. When the door closed, Clara looked up at Elias. "Something on your mind?" "Sheriff." He hesitated, then said, "How about dinner tonight? The hotel's opened a new restaurant civilized enough to impress even a doctor from Philadelphia. Thought you might enjoy something better than boarding house fare." Clara blinked, taken aback. "Are you asking me to dinner?" "Sheriff McGraw." A flush crept across his sun-darkened cheeks. "Yes, I am. Doc, Mayor Alden suggested I see how you're settling in. An official duty." Then she said lightly, though she felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. Elias cleared his throat. "The mayor might have mentioned it, but I would have asked either way." For a moment, Clara simply studied him, his usual confidence tempered by a flicker of uncertainty. Then she smiled. "In that case, I accept both officially and unofficially." His answering grin was small but genuine, and it sent an unsteady flutter through her chest. "I'll call for you at 7, he promised, tipping his hat before stepping back into the sunlight. When the door shut behind him, Clara caught herself staring at it far longer than necessary, wondering what she should wear. Clara watched the door close behind Samuel Alden and felt the clinic grow quiet again. Her hands were still, but her thoughts moved fast. Elias McGraw lingered by the wall as though there was something left to say. When he asked her to supper, the invitation landed soft as cotton and heavy as an iron horseshoe at the same time. After he left, she stood for a full minute staring at the neat rows of bottles on her shelf, then laughed at herself and went to wash up. She owned a handful of respectable dresses suitable for a physician who wished to be taken seriously. Only one felt like it might belong at a proper table. It was a clear blue that set off her eyes, the very color her mother once claimed could steady a man. She loosened her hair just enough to keep it feminine without inviting comment, then checked her reflection. She looked like herself, but lighter somehow, as if a long road had just smoothed out. At the knock, she opened the door to find Elias without his trail dust. His shirt was clean, the dark vest brushed, his boots polished so well they caught the lamp glow. He held his hat in one hand and seemed for a heartbeat unsure where to put the other. "You look lovely," he said at last, and his voice was honest in a way that warmed her. "Thank you, Sheriff," she answered, then corrected herself with a smile. "Thank you, Elias. You clean up well." The hotel dining room surprised her. White cloths draped the tables. Oil lamps threw a quiet light that gentled every rough edge. A few heads turned when Elias pulled back her chair. Curiosity moved through the room like a small breeze. He leaned in and spoke low. "The town has a new pastime," he said. "They will make a story out of your supper if they can." "Should I worry?" she asked, smoothing her skirt. "Only if you expect privacy," he said. "Around here, we trade news the way some places trade coins. They began with soup and bread. Conversation found its pace without strain." He asked about the cases she had seen that morning and nodded in a way that told her he was listening for real, not only being polite. When she described the ranch hand who had waited too long to bring in his infected cut, Elias shook his head and said he had been telling that particular man to wear clean cloth around wounds since spring roundup. "And you?" she asked after a pause. "What brought you west?" He rolled the stem of his water glass between his fingers. "After the war, there was not much to hold me in Ohio," he said. "My folks passed on. The farm went to cover debt. I figured if I was going to work this hard, I might as well do it under a bigger sky." "How did you come to the badge?" she asked. "By accident and need," he said. "The old sheriff was killed in a bank raid. Men were scared. I helped pull a posse together. We brought 2 of the robbers back and buried the 3rd. When the dust settled, the council handed me the star. It felt like a way to serve that made sense." "That is admirable," she said. "It is necessary," he answered. "I do not think much on admirable." He tipped the talk toward her. "And you? What pushed a Philadelphia doctor past the Mississippi?" "I wanted to work where I was not a curiosity," she said, choosing each word. "Back east. A woman physician is a story people tell at dinner. Out here, I can be useful. There is more than that," he said gently. "I know the look of someone who packed up to outrun something." Clara set down her fork, surprised by how seen she felt. "I was engaged," she said. "He was a doctor. I learned he had been keeping company with a nurse while telling me we were a team." The humiliation was sharp, the pity sharper. "His loss," Elias said simply, and there was no pity in it, only plain conviction. Something inside her loosened at the sound. Plates were cleared. The room had fallen into that pleasant hum that follows good food when the street outside threw up a shout. Elias was on his feet before she could draw a breath. "Stay here," he said, already moving. Clara rose anyway and stepped with him onto the wooden porch. The night air tasted of dust and lamp smoke. Hoofbeats pounded from the far end of the street. Then 4 riders fanned out. Shots snapped at the sky. More noise than aim. The led horseman brought his mount to a sliding halt in front of the hotel and turned a grin that showed too many teeth. "Evening. Sheriff," he called. "Thought we would come greet the new sawbones. Heard we hired a lady." Clara felt every curious eye in the dining room shift behind her like a single creature. Elias put himself half a step in front of her without making a fuss of it. "State your business, Jed," Elias said, "then ride on. Ain't a man allowed to offer welcome." Jed McCall asked, the word welcome slick on his tongue. His gaze slid to Clara. "They said you were pretty. Doc, some things a man has to verify. You can tip your hat and be on your way," Elias said, voice flat as a board. "Your brother goes to trial in Fort Collins next month, and no parade in front of the hotel is going to change that." Jed spat into the dust. "We will see," he said. He studied Clara again, measuring. "You keep bad company. Ma'am, that badge draws bullets." "I believe I am safe," Clara said, keeping her tone even. "And if you're after advice from the town physician," she added, "I would recommend less whiskey and no shooting at the sky. It lowers a man's chances of avoiding my table." One of the riders barked a laugh and then swallowed it when Jed turned his head. The leader's smile thinned. "You got some fire?" "Doc," he said, "mind you keep it. The wind blows hard in these parts." He jerked his reins and wheeled his horse. The others followed, pounding down the street and tossing dust like a slap. Elias let out a breath so quiet she almost did not hear it. "When I ask you to stay inside," he said, "it is not for sport. I have never taken orders well." She answered. "I am learning," he said, and the corner of his mouth lifted despite himself. The hotel owner hustled to the doorway to ask if things were all right. Elias answered that they were and thanked him for the meal he had not finished. He offered Clara his arm for the walk back. The town had gone still again, as if the noise were a storm that moved through and left the air scrubbed clean. "You should not have to weather that on your first week," Elias said while they walked. "I have weathered worse than bluster," Clara said, "but thank you all the same." They moved past quiet shop fronts and the dark windows of the schoolhouse. Somewhere a dog barked once and stopped. At the clinic door, she turned the key and looked up at him. The lamplight from inside caught the silver at his temples and made it shine. "Thank you for supper," she said. "It was good to speak like ordinary people and not only doctor and sheriff." He nodded. "I am not always ordinary. My work does not lend itself to it, but I aim to try when I can." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you always carry the load alone?" "Someone has to," he said, then softer. "Maybe not always. Even the strongest shoulders need rest," she said again, and this time he did not dodge the truth of it. "I will keep that in mind," he said. "Get some sleep. Doc, Tomorrow the town will discover a new set of ailments." She smiled. "Then let us be ready to cure what we can." He touched the brim of his hat and stepped back. For a moment she thought he might say more. Instead, he gave a small nod and turned toward the street. Clara watched his figure move through the faint starlight until it faded. Only then did she step inside. She set her hat on its hook and placed her blue dress across the chair as carefully as if it were made of something rare. The room was quiet. She could still hear the echo of hoofbeats in the boards and the steadier echo of Elias McGraw's voice in her mind. She lit one more lamp and laid out clean bandages for morning. Beyond the window, the town settled. Somewhere a door closed. Somewhere a mother hushed a crying child. Clara set a hand on the smooth edge of her desk, felt the simple rightness of wood beneath her palm, and recognized the feeling that had crept over her at the hotel. Silverton Ridge was no longer only a place to work, it was beginning to feel like a place to belong. She blew out the lamp and let the dark come gentle. Clara Whitfield knew she ought to have stayed inside, but instinct pulled her to the porch. The rattle of hooves on the dirt street made the hotel windows shake, and within seconds a group of riders came barreling through Silverton Ridge, their whoops and gunfire splitting the quiet night. Lanterns swung wildly from the sudden commotion, townsfolk scattering for cover as the echoes rolled down Main Street. Elias McGraw drew his revolver without hesitation. "McCall's gang," he muttered under his breath. Then, louder, "Clara, get back inside now." She stood her ground. "If someone gets hurt, I need to be nearby." His jaw tightened, and he shifted just enough to put his tall frame between her and the approaching riders. "If you stay in plain sight, someone will get hurt. Now step back." The leader of the gang slowed his horse to a stop in front of them. A hulking man with a dark beard and mean eyes. He tipped his hat with mock courtesy, voice dripping with scorn. "Evening. Sheriff. Heard tell this town's got itself a new physician. Imagine my surprise when they said she was a lady." His gaze landed on Clara. His grin widened in a way that made her stomach twist. "Well now, pretty as a painted picture." Elias's stance hardened. "State your business, McCall, then be on your way. You're disturbing the peace." "Peace." Jed McCall spat the word as though it were sour. "I'm only offering welcome. A man can't greet newcomers anymore." He leaned forward in the saddle, his grin sharpening, "especially such a fine one." "You can tip your hat like a gentleman," Elias said, voice steady as iron. "Then ride on out." Jed's laugh was harsh, joined by a few of his men until he silenced them with a glance. "Hear that? Boy's sheriff thinks we ain't proper gentlemen." His eyes narrowed. "You still got my brother locked up in that jail of yours. Might be time to let him walk free. Your brother tried robbing a bank and nearly killed the teller. He'll stand trial in Fort Collins next month. That's the law, and you know it." Jed spat into the dust at Elias's boots. "We'll see about that." He turned back to Clara, his gaze crawling like a chill down her spine. "Word of advice, Doctor. Best be careful where you plant your trust. Sheriff McGraw's got a talent for making enemies." Clara's chin lifted, her voice calm though her pulse drummed in her throat. "I believe I'm quite safe, and if you or your men truly value my services, you do well to drink less whiskey and ride with more care. Otherwise, I'll be seeing you flat on my table sooner than you'd like." One of the riders barked out an unguarded laugh, quickly smothered when Jed shot him a glare. The outlaw's grin returned. Sly this time. You've got fire. Doc, let's hope it don't burn you. With a tug of his reins, Jed wheeled his horse around. See you soon, Sheriff. Real soon. The gang thundered off into the night, leaving only dust and a lingering unease behind. Elias turned toward her, eyes dark with frustration and something else she couldn't quite name. When I tell you to stay inside, it's not a request. Clara squared her shoulders. I've never taken orders well. My father could have told you that. For the first time that night, a reluctant smile tugged at Elias's mouth. I believe it. Then, more serious, McCall won't forget what just happened. He'll hold it against you that you stood with me. I wasn't standing with anyone, Clara corrected firmly. I was refusing to be intimidated in my own town. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze so direct she had to steady her breath. You're not what I expected. Dr. Whitfield, is that a complaint? Sheriff McGraw. Not at all, he said softly, almost reverent, just an observation. Something unspoken stretched between them, sharp as lightning and just as dangerous. Clara's heart thudded as if daring her to step closer. She remembered the vow she'd made never to risk her heart again, but Elias's eyes, clear and unflinching, made her wonder what it would feel like to let that guard slip. The spell broke when Mr. Kavanaugh, the hotel owner, poked his head out nervously. Everything all right. Sheriff Elias stepped back, and Clara felt the space like a loss. Just fine. He answered. McCall and his boys were making noise. They've gone. The walk back to the clinic was quiet, the town settling after the storm. The stars stretched high and brilliant above them, more than Clara had ever seen back east. She was acutely aware of the steady rhythm of Elias's boots on the boardwalk, the clean scent of leather and soap that clung to him, and the faint brush of his hand against hers now and again, like sparks waiting to catch. At her door, she fumbled for her key. Elias took it gently, unlocked the door, and pressed it back into her palm, his hand lingering on hers longer than was proper. Clara, he said, his voice low. I should warn you lately, I find myself thinking about you more than's fitting for a sheriff to think about his town doctor. Her breath caught. Is that so? He nodded once, eyes steady on hers. I've never been one to let personal matters mix with duty, but with you, I can't seem to help it. Maybe, she whispered, some exceptions are worth making. He stepped closer, close enough she could feel the warmth rolling off him. I want to be clear. I don't take matters of the heart lightly, nor do I. She answered, her voice barely audible. His hand lifted slowly, hesitating before his fingers brushed her cheek. Clara Whitfield, I want to be the first man you kiss in Silverton Ridge, he said softly, and the last man you'll ever love. Her knees went weak at the raw honesty of it. Before she could answer, his lips were on hers. The kiss was tender, reverent, and full of a promise neither of them had spoken aloud until now. His hand cradled her face as if she were something precious beyond measure, while her own hands found their way to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath. When, at last, they parted, Elias leaned his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the day you came diving behind that wagon, he confessed with a half-smile. A surprised laugh escaped her, hardly the most romantic first impression. You'd be surprised, he murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Courage is a powerful thing. The sound of footsteps on the boardwalk broke the moment. Elias straightened reluctantly. though he kept her hand in his. "I should let you rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." "Yes," she said, equally reluctant to let him go. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles. "Good night, Clara. Sweet dreams." As he walked away, his tall figure swallowed by the shadows of the street, Clara touched her lips, still warm from his kiss. What had begun as a simple supper had become something much more, something she hadn't dared hope for since leaving Philadelphia. Elias McGraw was nothing like the man she had once promised her future to. Her former fiancé had been polished, careful, his words rehearsed. Elias was direct, steady, and startlingly gentle beneath his weathered exterior. Inside her clinic, Clara lit a lamp in the small living quarters. As she loosened her hair and set her dress aside, she wondered what tomorrow would bring. She had come west in search of independence. Not romance, but perhaps Silverton Ridge was offering her both. And perhaps, against all odds, she might let herself take it. Life in Silverton Ridge soon proved far more eventful than Clara Whitfield had imagined. Within weeks, she found herself firmly woven into the fabric of the frontier town. Word of her skill spread quickly, and soon ranch hands, homesteaders, and weary mothers with sick children came knocking at her clinic door. Sheriff Elias McGraw made a habit of dropping by almost every day. Sometimes he came with genuine law business papers to sign, questions about wounded prisoners. Other times, his excuses were so transparent that Clara could not help but smile. On days when work allowed, they shared lunches at her desk, and twice more he had taken her to supper at the hotel dining room. People noticed. Mrs. Thatcher, who ran the boarding house, could hardly hide her delight whenever she caught sight of them together. Miss Carver, the school teacher, whispered conspiratorially to Clara one afternoon that Elias had never shown any real interest in a woman during his 3 years in town. Half the single ladies in the county tried and failed, she said with a grin. "Looks like you managed what none of us could, catching the sheriff's attention. Not everyone approved, of course." Mayor Alden made his feelings clear at the next council meeting where Clara was invited to discuss sanitation in the town well. "Your services are appreciated, Dr. Whitfield," he said with a pointed tone. "But I question whether it's wise for a woman of your profession to be so closely associated with Sheriff McGraw. A physician's reputation must remain above reproach." Clara, calm but firm, had answered. "I was unaware that the council concerned itself with private matters. I assure you, Mayor, my professional judgment is unshaken by my friendships." The mayor flushed, while two of the councilmen stifled smiles. Later, as Clara recounted the exchange while walking along the creek that wound just beyond town, Elias laughed outright. "Old Alden's been trying to rein me in since the day I pinned this badge on," he said, helping Clara over a narrow stretch of stones. "He believes investors will only come if we polish the place up like some eastern resort. And you," she teased, "too rough around the edges for his taste." Something like that. Elias's hand lingered on hers a beat longer than necessary. His eyes softened. "Alden dreams of railroads and hotels. I see ranchers, shopkeepers, children running to school, a place that grows honest and strong without losing itself. And where do I belong in these visions?" she asked. He stopped walking, turning her gently toward him. "You don't belong in either. You're something unexpected. Clara Whitfield." His arms came around her, and his lips found hers. Unlike their earlier kiss beneath her porch light, this one burned with a raw urgency that left them breathless. "I've been falling for you since the day we met. Elias murmured against her lips. Her heart soared, though a voice of caution whispered in the back of her mind. She opened her mouth to answer, but the crack of a rifle cut her words short. The tree behind them splintered, bark flying. Elias shoved her down, covering her body with his own as another shot rang out. "McCall," he growled, drawing his revolver. "Get to those rocks." He motioned toward a cluster of boulders a short distance away. "I won't leave you standing in the open," Clara protested. A bullet kicked up dirt inches from her skirt. Elias's voice was sharp. "This isn't a debate. Move." Clara scrambled on her hands and knees toward the rocks, clutching her skirts and keeping low. Elias fired back with steady precision, then dashed to join her. She gasped as she saw a red streak on his arm where a bullet had grazed him. "You're hurt," she cried, tearing a strip from her petticoat to staunch the bleeding. "It's nothing," he muttered, already peering past the rocks. "Can't see where they're firing from." "More than one shooter?" she asked, tying off the cloth. "Two, at least, maybe three," Elias said grimly, checking his revolver. "We're a mile from town, too far to risk running in daylight. So we wait until dark." He nodded. "They'll either grow impatient or they'll come closer. Either way, better odds once night falls." The long afternoon dragged into evening. Clara crouched beside him, her medical bag clutched tight, whispering when she dared. Every so often, another bullet struck near their hiding place, a chilling reminder of the danger. Elias remained outwardly calm, but she could see the strain in his set jaw and narrowed eyes. At one point, he turned to her quietly. "I'm sorry, Clara. This is on me. I should have known McCall wouldn't let things lie." "Don't you dare take the blame for another man's choices," she answered firmly. "You uphold the law. McCall made his decision to defy it. That blood is on him, not you." His eyes softened. "You truly aren't like any woman I've ever met." Hours passed until the sun finally bled away, and with dusk came silence. Elias tilted his head, listening intently. Not even the call of a bird. "I think they've gone," he whispered, "but it could be a trap. We'll move once it's fully dark." They waited, still as stones, until the moon rose high and silver. Then Elias rose to a crouch. "Stay close behind me, gun drawn." He led her carefully through the brush. Branches snapped underfoot. Owls hooted in the distance. Clara followed, heart pounding but steady, trusting the sure way he moved even with danger pressing on all sides. When they neared the edge of town, the faint sound of horses drifted on the night air. Elias stiffened, pulling Clara into the shelter of a cottonwood tree. He pressed her back against the rough bark, his body shielding hers completely. His breath was warm against her ear. Not a sound. 3 riders passed within yards, the voices unmistakable. "They'll be back in town by now," one muttered. Jed McCall's rough tone answered, "Let Blackwood stew a while. He'll know we ain't finished." Only when the hoofbeats faded did Elias ease back, his hand still firmly around hers. That was too close. "Come on, we need to get you safe." They slipped into Silverton Ridge under cover of night. When they reached the clinic, Clara lit the lamps and tended Elias's arm properly, cleaning and bandaging the wound. "What is it?" she asked when she noticed the troubled look in his eyes. "McCall's getting bold," Elias admitted. "Today was just a warning. Next time, he won't miss, then arrest him. On what charge? We never saw his face today, and without proof, the law won't stick." Even if I did lock him up, his men would stir more trouble. He set his jaw. This ends only one way. I'll have to deal with him once and for all. Clara laid her hands gently on his chest. Promise me you won't act reckless. Please, I won't, he said quietly. Then, after a pause, but I can't sit by waiting for his next move either. Not when your safety's at stake. He bent to press a kiss to her forehead, lingering a moment longer than necessary. Rest now. I'll check in at my office. The town needs to know we made it back. When he left, Clara sank into a chair, her thoughts racing. She had come west to build an independent life. Yet the thought of losing Elias filled her with a dread so fierce she could hardly breathe. Somewhere between bullets and whispered promises by the creek, she had fallen in love. The ride back to Silverton Ridge had been tense, every snap of a branch sounding like another rifle aimed their way. Sheriff Elias McGraw kept Clara close, pausing often to listen for pursuit. When the faint clatter of hooves drifted from the darkness, he drew her against the trunk of a cottonwood tree, his body shielding hers completely. Not a sound, he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. She froze, feeling the thrum of his heartbeat through his chest. 3 riders passed so near she could make out the gleam of their spurs in the moonlight. Jed McCall's voice carried clearly through the night air. They've likely reached town by now, he muttered. Boss wants us quiet for a spell. Let McGraw sweat. We'll have our chance again. The hoofbeats faded, leaving only silence and the rustle of wind through leaves. Elias exhaled slowly, the tension in his frame easing only slightly. Too close, he murmured, gripping Clara's hand. Let's get you home. They slipped into town without further trouble. Inside the clinic, Clara lit the lamps and set about tending his wound properly. She washed the graze, applied salve, and bound his arm in clean linen. All the while, she could see the storm in his eyes. What troubles you? She asked gently as she secured the bandage. McCall grows bolder, Elias admitted, dragging a hand through his dark hair. This was a warning. Next time he'll aim to kill. I can't ignore it any longer. Then arrest him, Clara urged, putting away her supplies. On what charge? We never saw his face tonight. Without proof, the law won't hold him. And if I did lock him up, his men would tear the town apart. He flexed his arm against the bandage. No, Clara, this ends only when I end it. Her chest tightened. Don't do anything reckless. Promise me. He covered her hands with his own, the steel in him softening at her plea. I won't rush in blind, but I won't sit idle either. Not while the people I care for are at risk. His eyes met hers with a depth that left her breathless. Especially you. He bent and pressed his lips to her forehead, lingering there. Rest now. I need to check in at my office, let folks know we're safe. After he left, Clara sat at her small kitchen table, the lamplight flickering over her thoughts. For days she had tried to pretend her feelings were nothing more than fondness, admiration perhaps, but the terror of losing him had stripped away her defenses. She was in love with Elias McGraw. That truth both frightened and steadied her. An hour later, a knock came at her door. She opened it to find him there again, his face drawn with weariness and something harder. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. Of course. He stepped inside, removing his hat. News reached town. McCall's men robbed a stage south of here this afternoon. Drivers dead. His voice carried tight, controlled fury. "I'm gathering a posse at dawn." Her stomach dropped. "You're going after them." "I have to. It's my duty." He moved closer, taking both her hands. "But before I go, there's something you need to hear." Her heart thundered. "What is it I meant, what I said earlier by the creek before the shooting started? Clara, I love you. Have from the moment you stood your ground against Jed outside the hotel. Maybe even before. I know it's sudden, and I know you came west to make your own way, not to find a husband, but I can't leave without telling you the truth." Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't need to say anything," he added quickly. "I'm not asking for promises. I just wanted you to know, in case you don't return," she whispered, her voice breaking. He nodded once, eyes locked on hers. "McCall's dangerous. I won't pretend this is without risk." Clara reached up, cupping his face in her hands. "Then hear me. Elias McGraw, I love you, too. I didn't come to Silverton Ridge seeking love, but I found it anyway with you. So you'd better come back to me, because I refuse to lose you just as I've found you." Something cracked open in him at her words. With a rough sound, he pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a desperation that matched her own. She clung to him, fingers threading through his hair, pressing herself close as if sheer force of will could keep him safe. When, at last, they broke apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "That's a powerful reason to return," he murmured. "The only reason that matters," she replied, holding him tight. They stood together in silence, gathering strength from each other, until he reluctantly stepped back. "I should go. We ride at first light." Clara nodded, her throat thick. "Be careful. Come back to me. Wild horses couldn't keep me away," he promised, brushing one last kiss to her lips before leaving. The next 3 days stretched like an eternity. Clara tended patients, mixed medicines, and made house calls. But every moment her mind was with Elias and the posse. She imagined every dreadful possibility: ambushes, bullets, a telegram bearing terrible news. Each night she lay awake staring at the ceiling, whispering silent prayers that he would return. On the third evening, as she was closing the shutters of her clinic, the faint rumble of hooves reached her ears. Her heart leapt. She hurried outside, shading her eyes against the fading sun. The posse was returning, riders weary and slumped in their saddles. Dust clung to their clothes, and their faces bore the exhaustion of hard pursuit. Clara's gaze swept the group, frantic, until at last the men parted, and there he was, Elias, leading his horse on foot, a bandage wrapped around his thigh. He was dirty, worn, but alive. Clara didn't care about propriety or the watchful eyes of the townsfolk. She ran straight to him, throwing her arms around his neck. Elias caught her, lifting her off her feet despite the obvious pain his wound caused. "You're hurt," she said, pulling back enough to see the blood seeping through the cloth. "It's just a graze," he assured her, voice rough. "Nothing worth worrying over." "I'll be the judge of that," she said firmly, her medical instincts taken over, with the help of one of the posse members. Elias made it into the clinic. Clara guided him to the examination table, her hands steady though her heart was still racing. She cut away the bloodied bandage, cleaning the wound with practiced care. The bullet had torn through flesh but missed bone and major vessels. Painful, yes, but not life-threatening. As she worked, she asked the question burning in her chest. "What about McCall? Did you catch him?" Elias's jaw tightened, his eyes shadowed with something she could not yet read. Elias McGraw's voice was low when he finally spoke. "Jed McCall is dead. He came out with his gun blazing. We had no choice. 2 of his men fell with him. The rest are in custody. They'll stand trial with his brother in Fort Collins." Clara Whitfield felt the weight of his words. She knew Elias never gloried in taking a life, even when it was necessary. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Don't be." His eyes darkened, but his voice stayed steady. "Jed made his choice a long time ago. What matters is Silverton Ridge is safe. You're safe." He reached for her hand, rough palm against her smaller one. When she finished bandaging his leg, Clara insisted he remain at the clinic overnight. Elias, too exhausted to argue, allowed her to guide him to the small bedroom she kept for patients who needed close watch. That night, as wind rattled the shutters, she checked on him one last time. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, shadows moving across his face. "You should be sleeping," she teased gently. "Can't," he admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see it again. The gunfire, the faces." Clara sat on the edge of the bed and took his hand. "It will ease with time. Wounds of the spirit heal slower, but they do heal." His expression softened, vulnerable in a way he rarely allowed. "Stay with me, just until I fall asleep." She nodded. Sitting back against the headboard, she let him rest his head in her lap. Her fingers stroked through his dark hair until his breathing slowed and deepened, finally giving way to sleep. Looking down at his face, calm at last, Clara felt something undeniable settle inside her. This was the man she wanted to face the years beside every storm, every hardship, every joy. The knowledge was both terrifying and freeing. Eventually, she eased down beside him, laying her head on his shoulder, letting the steady rhythm of his heart guide her into sleep. Morning light crept through the curtains when she stirred. Elias was already awake, his gaze fixed on her with quiet wonder. "I could get used to waking up this way," he said. She smiled, brushing back a lock of his hair. "How's your leg?" "Feels like someone shot me," he replied dryly, then softened his tone. "But worth it, if it means I get this moment with you." Heat rushed to her cheeks. She sat up quickly, reminded of propriety. "I should go. Patients will be here soon." He caught her hand before she could rise. "Clara, once all this is behind us after the trials and the town's calm again, I want to do things right, court you the way you deserve." Her heart swelled. "I'd like that." The weeks that followed were some of the happiest Clara had known. Elias kept his word, courting her openly. They walked together through town, sat side by side in the pew on Sundays, and stole quiet rides into the countryside whenever his badge allowed. Silverton Ridge took notice. Most folks approved. Mrs. Thatcher beamed whenever Clara passed, while Miss Carver all but confessed her delight, noting that Elias had never looked twice at a woman until Clara came along. Not everyone shared the sentiment. Mayor Alden remained cool, his disapproval simmering beneath every town council meeting. One evening, after Clara spoke about public health at a gathering, Alden's tone was sharp. A physician must be above gossip. "Dr. Whitfield, your closeness with Sheriff McGraw might cast doubt in the eyes of investors." Clara held his gaze steadily. "My reputation rests on my skill and integrity. Mayor, neither is for sale." Later, Elias laughed when she told him, He's never forgiven me for opposing his railroad scheme. He wants Silverton Ridge polished and profitable. He sees me as a rough edge and you as too independent to control." Her brow furrowed. "Is that why he's suddenly so interested in bringing in another doctor? I heard a Dr. Hamilton has been looking at property." Elias frowned. "Likely. Alden prefers people who owe him favors. You don't bend easy enough for his liking." Despite the mayor's maneuvering, Clara's practice flourished. Word of her care spread across the territory, especially among women who had never before spoken freely with a physician. Clara began hosting weekly gatherings on women's health. At first, the idea drew wary glances. Soon, it became one of the most anticipated meetings in town, a place where women found both knowledge and camaraderie. Winter settled early, laying its cold hand over the plains. Snow drifted across rooftops, and winds howled down from the mountains. Elias found excuses to linger at the clinic more often, patching shutters, fixing the stovepipe, carrying wood inside. In truth, it was the quiet hours they treasured most, speaking of the pasts they carried and the future they imagined together. On Christmas Eve, Elias invited Clara to supper at his small cabin on the edge of town. She arrived to find the place transformed. A pine tree no taller than her shoulder stood in the corner, decorated with paper stars and candles. A fire blazed bright in the hearth, casting warmth and light across the room. Clara's breath caught. "It's beautiful." He helped her with her coat and gloves, uncharacteristically nervous, wanted tonight to be something special. The table was set with surprising care, though the dishes were mismatched. He admitted sheepishly that Mrs. Thatcher had given him instructions, though he had cooked the meal himself: roast chicken, potatoes, and a pie for dessert. Dinner was delicious, but Clara noticed his distraction. His fork stilled more than once, and his conversation wandered. Finally, she leaned toward him. "Elias, what is it?" "You're troubled." He set down his knife, drew a deep breath, and reached into his vest pocket. "Not troubled, just nervous." From his pocket came a small velvet box. He set it on the table and opened it, revealing a simple gold ring set with a modest diamond that caught the firelight. "I had this sent for from Fort Collins. Wasn't sure it would arrive in time." He pushed back his chair and came to one knee beside her. His voice, though steady, carried all the weight of his heart. "Clara Whitfield, from the day you arrived in Silverton Ridge, I've loved you. You're the bravest, kindest, most extraordinary woman I have ever known. I want to build a life with you to stand beside you through whatever comes, for as long as the Lord grants us both breath." The fire popped in the silence that followed, his eyes searching hers. The question hung between them like a breath held too long. "Will you marry me?" Sheriff Elias McGraw asked, his voice steady but his eyes betraying the weight of hope behind it. Tears blurred Clara Whitfield's vision. "Yes," she whispered, then repeated more firmly. "Yes, Elias McGraw, I will marry you." Relief washed over his features as he slid the ring onto her finger. He rose, pulling her against him, kissing her with a tenderness that left her knees weak. When they finally parted, both were smiling so wide it almost hurt. "I had a whole speech planned," Elias admitted, his grin sheepish. "I was going to tell you how I wanted to be the first man you kissed in Silverton Ridge and the last man you'll ever love. But when it came to it, all I could think about was how much I love you." Clara brushed away a tear, admiring the way the firelight danced over the gold band. It was perfect, she said simply. When shall we be married? She asked softly. As soon as we can manage it, he replied without hesitation. Spring, maybe, when the snow melts and wildflowers bloom across the plains. Spring it is, she agreed, unable to stop smiling, though that gives Mayor Alden plenty of time to try to talk us both out of it. Elias laughed, tugging her close. Let him try. Some things are meant to be. You and me, that's one of them. News of their engagement swept through Silverton Ridge like prairie fire. Most townsfolk offered heartfelt congratulations, though a few muttered about the speed of their courtship. Mrs. Thatcher immediately declared herself the unofficial wedding planner, while Miss Carver volunteered to help Clara prepare her trousseau. Predictably, Mayor Alden received the news with frosty reserve. When Clara encountered him at the general store, he remarked stiffly, I hope you've considered what this union may do to your professional reputation. A married lady doctor is unorthodox. So is a woman doctor at all. Mayor, Clara replied with pleasant firmness, unconventional suits me just fine. As winter gave way to spring, the preparations gathered pace. Clara wrote east to her family in Philadelphia and soon received letters brimming with excitement. Her mother and siblings promised to travel west for the wedding, braving the long journey with enthusiasm. Meanwhile, Elias worked alongside the town carpenter, expanding his modest cabin at the edge of town. A second bedroom was added, the kitchen enlarged, and the living area made more welcoming. For our future, he told her when she expressed surprise at the renovations. Someday, for our family. The thought of their children filled Clara with a joy so new and overwhelming that she could scarcely find words for it. By April, the snows had melted. Wildflowers spread across the open land like a quilt of color. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in May, to be held at the church with a celebration afterward in the town square. As the day drew nearer, Clara often found herself reflecting on the unlikely path that had brought her here. She had come west to escape betrayal and to carve out independence, never imagining she would discover a love so profound it would change the very course of her life. The night before the wedding, as she packed the last of her personal belongings at the clinic, a knock came at the door. She opened it to find Elias standing there, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. I know it's bad luck to see the bride before the ceremony, he began, but I needed to talk to you. Concern prickled. She ushered him inside. What is it? He took both her hands in his. I received a telegram this evening from the territorial governor. They're opening a new federal marshal's office in Fort Collins, and they've offered me a position. Her breath caught. Fort Collins was nearly 100 miles away. You'd be leaving Silverton Ridge. Not without you, he said quickly. I'd never make that decision alone. But I couldn't stand before you tomorrow and vow myself to you without telling you first. It would mean moving, leaving your practice here. It's a lot to ask. Clara studied his face, seeing both hope and conflict there. Do you want the post? He hesitated, then spoke carefully. It would give me a chance to do more good, bring order to places that need it desperately. The pay is better, and a city like Fort Collins has opportunities, schools, hospitals. It might be a finer place to raise a family. He squeezed her hands. But I won't accept it if it costs me you. If your heart is here, we'll stay. She thought of Silverton Ridge, the friends she had made, the women who trusted her care, the patients who relied on her. Then she thought of Elias, of the life they could build together. Fort Collins needs doctors, too," she said slowly, "especially women doctors. I'd wager," hope flared in his eyes, "you'd be willing to leave Silverton Ridge will always hold a piece of me," she said, her voice steady. "It's where I found you, but our life together matters more than any one place. We can always return, and one day, perhaps, when we've saved enough, we could open a practice side by side, you with the law, me with the healing." Emotion choked his voice as he pulled her into his arms. "I don't deserve you." "Nonsense," she whispered into his shoulder. "We deserve each other. Now go. Elias, the next time I see you, it will be at the altar." The wedding day dawned with skies as blue as polished glass. The air carried the sweetness of spring blossoms, the snow-fed creek rushing joyfully beyond the edge of town. Clara dressed with the help of her mother and sister, who had arrived the previous day. Her mother fastened the veil with trembling fingers. "He's a good man," she said quietly. "I see it in his eyes when he looks at you." "He is," Clara agreed, smoothing the ivory satin of her gown. "The best man I've ever known." The church filled to bursting, every pew crowded, neighbors pressed shoulder to shoulder. A hush fell as Clara stepped inside on her brother's arm, a bouquet of wildflowers in her hands, joy shining in her heart. Sheriff Elias McGraw stood at the front of the little church in Silverton Ridge, his hands clasped so tightly the knuckles showed white. When the doors opened and Clara Whitfield stepped in on her brother's arm, his expression shifted from nerves to open awe. She moved up the aisle through a sea of familiar faces. Spring flowers bright in her bouquet and a quiet certainty bright in her eyes. They spoke their vows before God and the gathered town, simple words that felt larger than any speech. For Clara, it was as if the road that had started in a far eastern city had finally found its true end, not at a destination on a map, but in the steady gaze of the man waiting for her. The minister blessed them and smiled. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Elias lifted her veil. Love made his eyes shine like new water in sunlight. "Hello, Mrs. McGraw," he whispered, and then his lips were on hers, sealing the promise they had already been living. The celebration spilled from the church to the square and lasted far into the night. Fiddles sang, boots thumped the boards, and long tables groaned under platters of food that seemed to multiply as quickly as the laughter, as the sun went down, throwing a curtain of gold over the mountains. Elias drew Clara away beneath an old cottonwood whose branches swayed easy in the evening breeze. "Happy?" he asked, his arms settling around her waist. "Completely," she said, resting her head against his chest, listening to the slow, sure beat there. "Though I am looking forward to a little quiet in our own home." He chuckled, the sound warm and low. "As am I, Mrs. McGraw, as am I." A week later, they left for Fort Collins, promising to visit Silverton Ridge whenever they could. The road was long, but their purpose was clear. In the territorial capital, they built the life they had spoken of in lamplight. Elias pinned on a new badge and set about the work of a federal marshal. Gaining a reputation that stretched across the territory, he was fair, but no one mistook him for soft. Word spread that if Elias McGraw came to town, order was not far behind. Clara took rooms near the public square and opened a practice that welcomed anyone who needed care, but gave special attention to women and children who had too long gone unheard. She taught midwives to read a fever and measure a dose. She coaxed stubborn ranchers into tending their cuts properly. and she learned the faces of fear that mothers wear when a child's cough will not ease. In time, those faces softened when they walked through her door. There were days she came home bone-tired, but they were good days, marked by the quiet satisfaction of work done well. 2 years from the wedding, they welcomed their first child, a girl they named Hope. Her name fit from the start. She came into the world with a strong cry and a hand that wrapped tight around Clara's finger, as if she had always known where she belonged. 2 years later, a son, Daniel, followed, solemn and watchful and beloved. 2 years after that, Elizabeth arrived laughing, a tumble of curls and curiosity. Their home was never truly quiet again, and neither of them would have had it any other way. As the family grew, so did their dreams. They kept a trunk by the door with a little money tucked away, saving toward a day when they could choose not only their work, but their place. Letters from Silverton Ridge continued to arrive, some stamped with Mrs. Thatcher's enthusiastic hand, others in the careful script of Miss Carver. The town changed in small ways and held fast in others. In one letter came the news that Mayor Alden had finally left office and left Silverton Ridge as well, chasing investments elsewhere. The railroad scheme he had pushed so hard withered, and the town settled back into its honest pace. In the spring of 1885, a full decade after a frightened young doctor had ducked behind an overturned wagon in a swirl of gun smoke, Elias and Clara packed their wagon and pointed it back toward the place that had knit their lives together. They returned to Silverton Ridge, not as guests, but as folks coming home. They bought land just beyond the last row of buildings, where evening light pooled easy at the edge of the prairie. With their savings, they put up a house that could hold a growing family and the laughter that came with it. On the same plot, they built a narrow front clinic with bright windows and a clean sign that read Dr. Clara Whitfield McGraw. The town council, eager and grateful, asked Elias to serve as county sheriff, a post he accepted with a nod and a handshake and a quiet promise to enforce the law as if every soul under it were kin. Mayor Alden was gone by then, and his grand schemes with him. Silverton Ridge had grown, but not in a way that made it less itself. New roofs had gone up, and the church had taken on a fresh coat of paint. Children chased one another along the boardwalk while their mothers talked in doorways and their fathers priced nails at the general store. It was a town made of handshakes and Sunday dinners, and the kind of neighborliness that counts for more than coin. On warm summer evenings, when the chores were done and the dishes dried, Elias and Clara sat shoulder to shoulder on their porch and watched the children play in the yard, while the sky went from orange to violet. Hope braided grasses into crowns for her sister. Daniel built a fort from scrap lumber and declared it a fort no one could breach, and Elizabeth gathered fireflies in a jar with fierce concentration and then let them go all at once, like a tiny constellation come to ground. Sometimes the talk drifted back to the beginning. They remembered the first gunshot that had rattled Clara's bones, the feel of splinters in her palms, the steadiness in Elias's voice even when the street ran hot with noise. They remembered the hotel lamps and the taste of supper she could hardly swallow for the way he looked at her, the moonlight on the boardwalk, the words he had spoken at her door that changed the course of both their lives. They remembered the creak and the bullets snapping through bark and the way love had stood its ground there, stubborn as any rock in the stream. "Do you ever regret it?" Elias asked one evening as the youngest chased fireflies and the older two argued amiably about who had the better throwing arm. "Comin' west," Marrying a dusty lawman instead of some polished Eastern doctor? Clara turned to look at him, taking in the silver that had crept through his hair, the lines at the corners of eyes that were still a steadfast blue. Never, she said, the word as sure as a stake driven deep. You were right. You know, about what? She smiled and let the memory touch her voice. You were the first man I kissed in Silverton Ridge, and you will be the last man I ever love. Elias drew her close and pressed a kiss to her temple. And you, Clara Whitfield McGraw, are the best decision I ever made. Twilight deepened, and they sat together while the air cooled and the first stars came on overhead. Out beyond the yard, the prairie breathed in its slow way, and the cottonwoods lifted their leaves to the small night breeze. The house behind them held the sounds of a life they had built one day at a time, a life made of patched roofs and mended wounds and long rides home, of schoolroom recitals and church suppers and moments that would have slipped by unnoticed if not for the hand they kept holding through them all. If anyone had told the girl from Philadelphia who stepped off the stagecoach in 1875 that she would trade city streets for this, she might have laughed, but on that dusty morning she had set her jaw, followed the sound of a gun, and found not only her work but her heart. What began with a leap into danger had become a long promise kept season after season, year after year, under a sky wide enough to hold it. On the porch in the dark, Elias's hand found hers and stayed there. The years ahead waited like an open trail. They would ride it together, at its heart. Clara and Elias's story reminds us of something timeless. Love is not found in perfect moments, but in the courage to stay when life turns hard. For those of us looking back on many years, it speaks to choices we all have faced when the safe path seemed easier, but the braver path promised meaning. Clara left behind her old life, not knowing if she would find belonging. Elias carried the weight of duty, yet he dared to let someone see his tenderness. Together, they remind us that strength and vulnerability are not opposites, they are partners. Love asks us to show both. As we grow older, the lesson deepens. It's never about where we build our home, but with whom we share the porch at sunset. True love is less about grand gestures and more about choosing each other every day. Even when the years bring change, loss, or silver hair, their story tells us that no matter how late in life or how far from where we began, it is never too late to find a love that lasts, if only we dare to open our hearts. Thank you, dear friends, for sharing this journey with us. If Clara and Elias's story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to Frontier Hearts so you'll never miss the next tale of love that defies time and distance. Your support keeps these stories alive.